what is the most efficient way to run tests on a code base? I would say when you're getting to the continuous integration portion or the build portion of your code base, the most efficient way to do testing is to make sure first that you have the testing, that you have unit testing built in, but to set up a separate branch where you do your work. When you make changes to that branch, you can have your repository watched via something like Azure DevOps. When those changes go in your build pipeline or your CI pipeline, you can kick those tests off automatically. So to keep it efficient, you can trigger those tests based off of the work that you're already doing. So you don't have to go and run those tests manually. The build pipeline will do that for you. And again, this is part of the CI/CD pipeline, the build and release pipeline.
Hey there, welcome back to another edition of DevOps Fireside Chats. My name is Jay Gordon. I am your host. I bring you this once a month. And what do? We have conversations about different DevOps topics. And so I'm really happy that we have this super dynamic panel of panelists that are DevOps engineers. They are developers. They are people who really understand what goes into the process of getting this done. And so I want to bring them all in one at a time. First, I'm going to bring in Pierre. Hey, Pierre, how are you today?
Hey, Jay. I'm doing great. Good to see you.
Next, I'm bringing in Austin. Hey, Austin, how are you today?
Good.
I'm all right. I'm going to bring in Jessica. Hey, Jessica.
Hey, Jay. How's it going?
Good. And of course, last but certainly not least is Kat. Hey, Kat, how are you today?
I'm excellent.
So we are here and doing this this conversation. Like I said, we do this once a month. And if you would like to, we've got a poll up. I would love you to be part of our poll. And so what we're asking today is, what are you using for your CI/CD? You can head over to the LearnTV page. You can see we've got our poll up right here. And if you'd like to ask questions, send some comments, whatever it is you'd like to do, why don't you go ahead and head over to there and you can put it in the chat. We've also got our native chat here in whatever platform you're using, like YouTube or Twitch. We'll be able to see everything. And we've even got someone already saying hello from Atlanta. So very cool. I will make sure we keep talking about the poll. But first of all, I'd love to get just some introductions done. We said hello, but I'd like to hear a little bit about you and what you do. And so I'm going to ask Pierre, would you give us a little rundown of what you're up to?
So yeah, I joined Microsoft since 2007, and I was back then a premier field engineer supporting TFS. And currently my role is a DevOps architect in consulting, specifically in the QRS team.
Very cool. Thank you so much. And then, of course, next we've got Austin. Austin, why don't you tell us a little about you, what you do, where you do it, because I know you are not Microsoft. We've got two non-Microsoft guests today. Why don't you give us a little rundown?
I feel so honored. I'm Austin Parker, Principal Developer Advocate at Lightstep. We are an observability company, so we help you make sense of all the bits and bobs and ones and zeros that are going on for your complex microservices applications, or less complex ones. We're not judging. Outside of that, I wrote a book on distributed tracing called Distributed Tracing in Practice. It's a O'Reilly publication. And you might also know me as one of the organizers of Deserted Island DevOps, the world's first Animal Crossing DevOps conference, coming again on April 30th.
Very
DesertedIsland.club.
Very cool. I always know how proud you are of the fact that you can do a conference within a video game. I'm still...
You know how I roll.
My mind is still blown by that. So next, we've got Jessica. Hey, Jessica. Why don't you tell us a little about you, what you do, and how you do it?
Hi, Jay. My name is Jessica Dean, and I work for Microsoft. I'm one of the cloud advocates here. And I do a little bit with DevOps, a little bit with containers, a lot with Linux, and even more with people and community.
Very, very cool. You do it very well. I really enjoy your work. It's always so impactful and energetic. I always enjoy it. And then last, and like I said, certainly not least, we've got the very, very accomplished and awesome Kat Cosgrove. Hey, Kat, why don't you give us a little info?
Hello, my name is Kat Cosgrove. I'm a developer advocate at JFrog. We make DevOps tools, but myself, I spend most of my time teaching people about DevOps. I focus like super heavily on very introductory level content for DevOps tooling and concepts and on and on and on. And you may also know me from Twitter, where I am accidentally a minor celebrity over a Kubernetes drama.
Well, you know what? If we can kind of keep you different from Ian Coldwater, we'll try to get through that. I know how difficult it is for some of us to be able to identify the two of you, but you know what? I love what you do individually, even though we all seem to love Ian and what they do as well. So we've got, of course, an hour. And within that hour, what we're going to do is we're going to take some questions. We're going to answer some questions, and we're going to learn a little bit about CI/CD. And so I'd love to get started. And so I'm going to ask Pierre for you to kind of answer this first, and then the rest of you, starting with Austin, Jessica, Kat, why don't you take your own whack at it? How do you define the continuous integration and continuous delivery process?
So great. So as you already defined it, the CI/CD process, which is continuous integration and continuous deployment, is basically the automation process where you take a typical application, and then when changes are being made, it triggers to run the continuous integration, and then the same configuration, which we call today pipeline, can also be configured for your CD delivery process. So in a layman's term, I would simply call it automation. Now, the process can vary. It depends on the source repo. It depends whether you are using ADO or GET. So the configuration may be a little bit much more different. And then you make calls, through an agent pipeline, and the agent is actually working behind the scene in order to make the process complete. If you will, back in the days, if you're using a Visual Studio, for instance, it's really the compiler. But we've automated the process so much now because everything is on the web. And as such, you need to provide, people who are not even, developers, so that they can use the CI/CD process. And it provides really higher quality code, to everyone involved in the team.
Gotcha. Hey, Austin, why don't you provide your own answer there? I know we just got a great one from Pierre, but how do you define it?
Yeah, honestly, it's hard to find something else to fit in there, right, with Pierre's answer, because it's very comprehensive, and I think it covers when you or I, if you go out and you start talking about CI/CD, that's the answer you're going to get. One thing, I will put a twist on it, though. I think the important thing about CI/CD and how I would really define an effective CI/CD process is that it's something where you are, there's a goal to it. And it's not just, a lot of people say like, oh, well, I have, GitHub Actions set up, or I'm using TeamCity, or I have these tools and I'm putting these tools together, right? And these tools are giving me an automated process. But I think the real goal and what makes an effective CI/CD process is that it's reducing the amount of time it takes for a change to be both integrated, right, what I mean by continuous, but also make that change live, right? Or at least running in production. Because the best way to see if your code is going to work as part of a greater system of even in a monolithic system is to actually run it in prod. So the quicker you can ship to prod, the more reliable and more confident you are about those changes. That's what CI/CD, the CI/CD process really enables. And as long as you're figuring out how to do that with your tech stack and with the tools you have and the systems and processes you have, then I think you have effective CI/CD. We can quibble about the details, but as long as you're going towards that goal, that's the goal.
That's a great answer. It makes a ton of sense. So let's move on to Jess. Jess, why don't you let me know how do you define it?
I mean, I think what Pierre and Austin has said before, like that definitely aligns. I mean, it's hard to kind of fit something in, but just to double click on what Austin said as far as on how there's usually a goal with CI/CD. I personally believe that end goal is not just delivering code and features in your application ultimately to an environment. I think the end goal is to be able to deliver value and deliver value continuously in a reliable and repeatable way. And that's one of the benefits that CI/CD offers because in part that it reduces the chance for human error. It reduces the amount of time that you as a human or an operator has to be involved in doing all the manual steps that you had to do prior to having a CI/CD process. And then again, it allows you and empowers you to hopefully effectively deliver value. And then if you're not delivering value, what are you doing? And CI/CD is not going to solve that for you. That goes back to planning and talking with your team and getting on the same page. But I believe that that's ultimately the end goal for everyone I've ever spoken to is we all want to deliver something valuable to our customers.
Very, very cool. And so, Kat, I know that it's a loaded question, and so I'm going to let you try to answer it here.
So I teach people about CI/CD a lot. It's one of my favorite 101 talks to give. And I'm going to approach this from a slightly different angle since the actual definition of CI/CD has already been covered. I don't write production code. I haven't had to write production code in quite a while. So for me, CI/CD is about enabling me to be extremely lazy with my side projects. I don't like repeating myself. And using having a good CI/CD system in place lets you be lazier. Everything I do, every tool I use as a developer is there to make it easier for me to be lazy. I want to get more done with way less work because now the overwhelming majority of the code I write is for me. It is a side project and I don't want to waste my time manually running tests or seeing if it builds. I don't want to deal with that. So for me, CI/CD is a way to reliably make sure that I can spend more time doing what I actually want to do, which is building stupid things for fun.
Sure. Wow. That's great stuff. I really love what you all gave me here. And so we've got a good 45 minutes to keep chatting. And I just wanted to go ahead and allow people to, our non-Microsofties to have a moment to plug some stuff. And so first, if you want to find out about Artifactory's CI/CD, you can go to this URL. I know you can also reach out to Kat on Twitter if you have more questions. And then also we've got some Lightstep information. If you want to optimize your CI/CD pipeline and get a look into what you're doing, check out Lightstep. And that leads me into my next question. And I'm going to ask, let's start with Austin. Austin, how does observability here, how does that fit into the CI/CD process?
It's a great question. I think there's two ways to think about it. One is that if you are, let's go back to what we just said about the goal of CI/CD, right? It's to deliver value to customers faster, but it's also to sort of build more empathetic teams in some ways, right? I used to work at a place, a big .NET shop, and we were not very agile in a lot of ways. So code would sit on feature branches for weeks or months on end. And then when we got close to release, there was sort of this big, code freeze. Okay, we need to integrate all these changes. People have been, working on the similar sections of code. So there's a lot of manual sort of going around and trying to fit all this stuff together, right? And then once you had fit all that stuff together, now all the tests you had, now all of the benchmarks you had done, that information is kind of gone because you were doing it in isolation without all these other changes. So observability fits into this by the principle of observability is that I can ask arbitrary questions about my code, about my system, right? So if you are in a place where your goal is, hey, I want to make change, I want to ship software faster, I want to deliver value to customers faster, I want a better, higher functioning team, then I need ways to sort of just see what's going on at all times. And I don't want to have the constraints of traditional, just host-based monitoring or, grepping through logs or whatever. I need rich data sources. I need something that can link these disparate sources of data together and let me sort of say like, okay, what's changed and why did it change? And that's what observability gives you. So you need it there, and you also need it when you're actually creating a CI/CD process, right? When you're writing that automation, it's very helpful to know, like, how long did this take after I made this change, right? I changed the deployment script, and now I want to see what's happened. So regardless of the tools you're using, regardless of the platform you're using, being able to have that sort of in-depth information, because your automation is just code too, right? It's not some lesser form of code. If you're writing a program to deliver your code, then you're writing a program. So that's also a place that you need observability.
Pierre, I'll ask you kind of the same thing, and I'll even pivot it to adding monitoring. How do you find? Go ahead.
So Austin, thank you for defining that. So when you talk about observability, you're actually talking about the output telemetry. Things such as logs, data, monitoring services, what you can actually see to ensure that your application is running as intended or not. And it gives you tremendous amount of data so that you can take that feedback, go back and improve the whole process of automation. As you can see today, so essentially, applications are very easy today. In 25 days or in 30 days, you can develop one complete web page, and at the end of the day, if you're one person, you have 30 pages. Multiply that by the number of people you have in your team, you can have, let's say 10 people, times 30. My math is not so good, but you can see, so all of these pages are, functioning whether you're selling product or you're actually getting into some other, site, and you want to get the feedback. And for this, the output, the telemetry which you get will help you to either improve one page or the last page or the first page and what have you. And it's very essential for you moving forward, so that by the end of the year, you can have 365 pages times 10, that's like already 3,000. But you not only you maintain the quality and the feedback flow coming back from the output to where your CI/CD started, and just like Austin said, it's really telemetry.
Yeah, that makes sense. Jess, what do you think observability and how do these fit in your opinion? You're muted, Jess. Sorry.
I was going to say absolutely, and then I was going to apologize for the fact I keep coughing. I managed to get the conference flu, never going to a conference this year or leaving my house. So I have a wicked cough for a few weeks now. But anyway, as far as observability, again, it's hard to follow Austin and Pierre because they covered it so well. But again, I think it fits into not just CI/CD, but the DevOps story as a whole, because you can take the information that's provided from those observability tools and from the observability that you have set up, and you can apply that to your next sprint, to your process. You can take that feedback loop, and that feedback loop is so important in the bigger DevOps perspective. It's going to directly impact not only your CI/CD process, but again, that value delivery as well.
Very, very cool.
I want to actually add something to what Jess just said, if I can. Sure. You actually hit on something that I've been trying to I haven't quite found the words for it yet, but the more I read and the more I work I do on observability, the weirder it is to me that it is this kind of subspecialty, or it's sort of treated as this new thing. But when you get back to it, I mean, isn't really observability about creating these feedback loops, like you said? And if you go look at the history of, when we've talked about feedback loops as part of DevOps, as part of Agile, that's just the core thing. That's what this is all going towards.
Yeah, but I think the reason how come people think it's new now is because now it kind of has a different name. And a lot of times when I hear people talk just about DevOps or they're getting started, there's so much emphasis on just CI/CD and just source control. And then the conversation stops there. But that's not all DevOps is, right? I mean, especially if DevOps starts with people and making sure people are on the same page, that means that communication and that feedback loop is essential to the process being successful.
Yeah, sure. And I think that's the thing that I've been trying to figure out the words for, right? Is how do we extend that metaphor about communication and say well, look, observability is just a language, is a language, or it's a set of terms that you should use in order to communicate these topics. I have a rant on SLOs in this vein that we can get to later, but it is interesting that kind of the churn of this thing, right? Where terms are, they go under the surface and then they bubble back up as someone markets around them, and then it goes back, and it becomes normalized. We slipstream it into this thing we were already doing. Anyway.
Kat, did you have anything?
Reminded me of that.
Kat, did you have anything to add about our observability question?
Something small.
Sure.
I do think that it is a little bit irritating that we kind of put observability in the corner when it is something that we should be thinking about this from the very beginning. Don't you want to know what's going on in your application? Why would you want to ignore that data? You should never want to ignore that data. So this should be something that we just think of from the very beginning. This should you should start there, not with, I don't know, whatever weird DevOps tool of the day is trendy. No, observability should be considered a core tenet. That is just a thing you do. It is not optional.
Well, Kat, you touched on what is going to be our next question, and I'll let you start by answering it with, what tools would you recommend as a beginner in using CI/CD? I mean, I remember personally, the first touch upon it I got was Jenkins.
That was mine too. Yeah.
And I don't know if that's necessarily the best one for a beginner.
Yeah, I would not recommend it for a beginner. I'm pretty open about not being a huge fan of Jenkins for a beginner to learn CI/CD. I actually think that the best options are GitHub Actions or Circle CI. They are both very simple to use. They are both extremely well documented, and they both support a variety of languages and build environments. So for just starting out, brand new baby, have no conceptual understanding of CI/CD, but you can work GitHub, I would use GitHub Actions for it. That is what I usually use to teach people. And Circle CI, if you want to go in a little bit deeper. I actually learned on Travis CI, but I haven't.
Sure, I played with a little Travis myself. So Pierre, I know you're a little tied to one, but I'm going to ask you.
Sure.
as a DevOps architect,
Yes.
what would you recommend to people on what to use to really get started?
So I have a little bias on this one here, and excuse me, folks. Primarily because everything. I mean, I used to think, okay, I was to be a tool advocate for Azure DevOps and so forth. But based on the ecosystem of the cloud, whether using AWS or Azure, it really doesn't matter anymore. However, when you look at technology, Microsoft is probably the best integrated tooling company on earth. So whether you're using Python, Ruby, Go, and stuff, bring it to Azure DevOps or GitHub, as Katz and Jessica have spoken about, because we'll be able to actually integrate all of these tools together so that you can have an easier deployment into Azure or AWS. So whether you're using Terraform or ARM template or anything else you can imagine, in the past, of course, I had the fear to combining all of those tools in order to be able to have an end product. But today, it doesn't really matter. But if I have to choose, I will either go with GitHub and Azure DevOps. And I've used some of those of Jenkins, Bamboo, and integrating all of those into the CI/CD ecosystem. So I'm tool agnostic today, but that wasn't the case in the past where I had some biases.
Sure. Jess, what are you really enjoying, and what do you think is the best for our new users to take a look at?
So I think that those are two different questions, because what works for me might not be what would work for an end user or customer,
Sure.
and vice versa. I, working for Microsoft, might get flack for this, but I would say to use whatever tool the end user finds easy. And I mean, there's so many out there. So it's going to, again, if the end goal is going to be to continuously deliver value. And for example, with Jenkins, one of the biggest gripes is, I mean, it's Java, it's Groovy, it's code. And if for whatever reason that you find that easy, then go for it. Jenkins has a lot of options. You can do declarative pipelines. You can do container-based pipelines. You can do the standard traditional pipelines where you have a build server and each task executes along that server. Jenkins is certainly powerful, and it's free and easy to get started. But then there's also tools like Azure DevOps, which you can also get started for free. And that gives you an entire platform that you can also extend and customize, especially if you're a .NET developer. There's JFrog Pipelines, which does container-based pipelines as well. And so that's another key decision, I think, is as you're getting into this, and I have blog posts on this too, there's different types of pipelines, of CI/CD processes, of ways to run that. The traditional way is standard build server, or you can do the new cloud native way where you run each individual task inside a container itself. Some people find that more beneficial if they're already using Kubernetes workloads. And in which case, then you probably want to go towards a tool that was designed to serve that, whether that's, again, JFrog Pipelines, Jenkins can do it. There's another company called CodeFresh. And then, of course, Circle CI, Travis CI. Anytime I get asked what tool should I use, my answer is always the one that works for you. Because at the end of the day, that's what's important.
That's a great answer. And I think ultimately people want to be able to use what they understand. I think that's the first and foremost. Austin, I'll let you kind of finish this one up. What do you think a new user should look at if they're going to be jumping into the pool of CI/CD?
I'd mostly echo what Jess said. I think the best tool is the one that works for you. And a lot of times that's the one that's closest to you, right? So you probably have expertise in something, or your organization has a muscle built up around a language or a stack or whatever, right? So use that, or at least something that comports to that. A couple notes: if you are going to use Jenkins, I would actually recommend looking into the newer versions of Jenkins, Jenkins X. I don't know what the licensing or I don't know if it costs anything, but I do know that they've added open telemetry support for observability for tracing of your build pipelines, which is very cool. So plus to them. Also, I would look into other open source solutions, things like Argo CD, if you're in the Kubernetes world. Personally, I think most 90% of all CI/CD, runners are kind of standardizing around the idea of YAML to define pipelines, and it's not you use one, you've used them all. But if you know YAML and you know how to create things that go in order, then you're probably going to be fine.
Absolutely. And so I want to remind everybody, we've got a poll going. We'd love you to kind of jump onto LearnTV, get over to the poll, answer the question we're asking right now. What are you using for CI/CD? If you're not using any of these, I recommend just throw it into the comments. We'll take a look and see what we can find out people are using. So we're going to move ahead, and we've already been through a half hour. Time just flies by. And so I want to talk a little bit now about tests. And I think testing is really an important part of this. Sure, getting to the deployment process makes a lot of sense, but that integration really requires us to take some time and think about the process that's going to make sure our code is reliable, that we do deployments with. And so, Pierre, I'll ask you first. How do you best determine the right tests to run in your pipeline?
So the basic tests to run into your pipeline are what we call functional tests, which means those tests ensure that your application does what it's supposed to do. And these are probably unit testing, for the most part. However, being on the web again, you have to think about, user interface. So for instance, if you're designing an application to be used on a cell phone, okay, whether I have small fingers or big fingers, you want to make sure that when I touch a button or whatever it is, that you won't actually touch two buttons at the same time to create all of those, And then since today we mostly we talk about the web, you also have to think about the load, okay, which means how many people are going to access my website, and is it going to crash after 100,000 people or 10,000 or even 100? So on a higher level, you can actually determine your tests in two categories: functional testing and then performance testing. And and then anything can go in between these two spectrums.
Sure. Kat, what is your thought on testing? What do you think are the right tests to make sure that are part of your pipeline?
I don't think that there is one specific set of right tests. Like there's not a most right or most wrong test for your pipeline. I think you should test everything you conceivably can, and then accept the fact that you're going to forget to test some things. You will figure out later that you should have tested for that, but like users are wildly unpredictable. You can hope that you are testing for every conceivable thing that a user might do, but you're not the user, and they are. Who knows what users are doing? I don't know what I'm doing when I'm a user. I just click on stuff, and they're going to do something surprising. So it's not so much that I think there is like one hard and fast like correct test suite to run. It's that you should test everything you think of, and then accept that you're not going to think of everything. It's not possible to get a perfect test suite IMO.
That's a really, really good answer. Jess, I'll ask you if you have your own take on it.
I do, and I've actually talked on this a lot. I've talked on it with who I think the industry recognizes as one of the leading experts on testing, Angie Jones. Follow her on Twitter because she is awesome. And I've learned a lot from her perspective as well. And one of the sessions that, or I guess webinars that her and I had done together was really talking about the different types of testing and focusing on visual testing. Because of course you have unit testings, you have integration, you have framework, functional testing, not framework. But you have to be very intentional with what you're writing in your test for any of those. And there's factors that you want to consider. We went over 5 different factors you want to consider. That includes speed, and it includes reliability, quantity, maintenance of those tests. And to Kat's point, I do think you should write tests for everything, but your tests should be intentional with the scenario you're thinking of. When you're writing certain tests, you want to think, is this going to actually cause a deployment to fail, right? And if it's not, then the information you're getting from that test result is kind of a nice to know, but it's making your test take longer. And the longer you're sitting there running your unit test, your integration test, your functional test, everything, ultimately to get it out into production, and then run also your, whether it's pixel testing, visual testing, AI, visual testing, whatever you're using, that's going to add another layer of speed, and that's going to affect how agile and liquid you are. So I think I can go into an entire hour talking about testing, but the best way I would say is to be very intentional with what you're writing and ask yourself what your end goal is with each test. What do you hope to accomplish from it?
Austin, I'll let you finish up.
All right, I'll finish up and take the contrarian position here.
Spicy.
Yeah, not terribly, but I actually think that there's too much. There's a lot of well-intentioned focus on testing as a practice in the industry as part of DevOps and part of CI/CD, but I often think we kind of don't stick the landing. I feel like most tests. I think if you had a magic wand and you could say like, aha, I want to know, I'm going to do code coverage now for every piece of software in the world, we would find that the majority, it's an 80-20 thing where 80% of the tests are completely worthless, and the 20% of tests that are good or are worthwhile are actually not, they're worthwhile, but they're only worthwhile because it was earned rather than given. So you should treat tests in the same way that you treat other topics that people don't like to do, like observability. But there has to be a reward, right? There has to be something that you're doing. There are things that should be blindingly obvious. Like, you don't need to do a bunch of unit testing to make sure, if you've implemented an algorithm, then you should do some basic things like, okay, sure, this works in the way I said it is, but it's more important to test it's more important to test that the behavior of the application is not going to, go off in its own weird direction, right? It's more important to make sure that things like contracts have not been broken. But you know what a good way to check that is? It's to deploy behind a flag of some sort and then have things in deployment that catch it and roll back, right? Like, it's better to move a lot of this sort of testing about, like, does it work when I push it to prod? Well, you figure that out when you push it to prod, and then if it doesn't work, then take it back, reel it back in and fix it. Rather than spending a lot of time up front coming up with, test plans and thinking about, like, all the different ways this can go wrong. If you've handled the happy path and then you're making sure that you're catching, like, 80th, 90th percentile of something weird happened, then everything else should just be like, I'm testing this in prod and I have really good mechanisms to ensure that one individual failure doesn't cascade through my system. That gives you a more resilient system, that gives you a more reliable system, and that's also a system that you can talk about better to other people in your organization. Because test coverage is one of those things that managers love, that executives love, that EVP, that engineering managers love, because it's like, oh, we can prove, this is a metric that we can prove something with. But a better way to prove that is to focus on things like, golden signals and SLOs, where you're actually talking about objectives and business outcomes and stuff that the people writing the checks understand.
Very
that's
cool.
That's my controversial take.
Well, I mean, it wasn't that spicy, but I'll take it. So I wanted to remind everybody that if you'd like to, after this wonderful session, if you want to actually do some free education, free training, and start using CI/CD, this is a really great place to get started. Implementing CI/CD with Azure DevOps, you can go to MS Learn, aka.ms/learn, and get the opportunity to use some gamified training and learn how to use some of these processes and that we've talked about, some of the complementary products. I know that there's a lot of great stuff around Azure DevOps, around GitHub Actions. And then, of course, we'd love you to take our poll today. Please head on to LearnTV. There you can go ahead and answer today's poll. What are you using? And if you are not using one of the things listed here, do me a favor. Send us a question or a comment, put it in the box on LearnTV, or you can use your native chat with whatever service you're watching on. We just want to learn a little bit more about what you're doing. And so one of the things that always comes up that it's a common thing that I hear about are anti-patterns, things that people are doing that don't really seem to fit in your opinion. Jessica, I'm going to ask you first. What do you think is a common anti-pattern that people build in CI/CD pipelines?
That's a great question. I feel like I have to think about that. I feel like I spend so much time talking to people about best practices that I forget the things that they do that they shouldn't do.
I can. We can come back, Jess.
Yeah,
if
I
you
was
want
going
to
to say
take
come
a
back
moment.
to me because I spend
Sure.
so much time talking about best practices where I haven't even thought about the wrong way.
Sure, Pierre. What do you think is a common anti-pattern that people run into? Because I know you're helping build Azure DevOps. Tell me a little bit about what you've seen, maybe things that people aren't necessarily doing correctly.
So actually, last year I gave a talk about anti-patterns in DevOps and CI/CD. So, and sometimes when you are, with customers on site, I mean, Excel is probably the largest, database on Earth. You can see that many of our, some people actually use Excel in order to then use it up to create, if you will, their CI/CD pipeline. Or let's say you have a bunch of PowerShell scripts, for instance. You save them in Word documents or, and stuff, and you don't check them up under the repo or source control. These are typical anti-pattern which you should really avoid, because anything which is stored on my desktop, none of you guys, and you are great teammates, you want to see that code in order to be able to build your pipeline. And so, and also, we make mistakes, right? Just Jessica and or Austin or Kat were referring about it before. Don't be afraid of making mistakes. We all do. But you can identify my own mistakes very quickly, and then you really reinforce the team. So there are a lot of anti-patterns, and we need to break away from storing things on our own desktop and put everything into either Azure DevOps or GitHub or any other source repo which you have. When it comes to CI/CD, these are the typical ones. So don't store any script, any other thing on your desktop.
Very, very cool. Austin.
I also can't think of a ton because I tend to be a bit of a, well, I mean, the biggest thing here, okay, I'll give you three. I'll give you three quick ones. So one is
I knew he could do it.
Avoid, one thing I've seen is avoid having manual approval processes, right? Like if you can, there's certainly cases where you're in a highly regulated industry or something and you need like sign-offs or whatever, and it's kind of fine in that case. But you should bias towards getting people out of the way of your CI/CD as much as possible. So if you have things where it's like, oh, I can run these tests, but I can't deploy until my manager or someone clicks a button, like I would say that's an anti-pattern. 2, avoid, if you can, I would say certainly avoid having different CI/CD for different environments, right? Like preferably you only want one environment, and that environment should be production, and you should just be running all of your CI and all your CD, and everything should be going straight to prod, and you should be shipping to prod multiple times if it's at all possible, simply because that's going to be the best place to see how it works in prod, right? Your staging environment will never, no matter, I keep saying evers, but it will never look like production because it's not production. The only thing that's production is production. It's the final test, so just start with that.
Sure.
And then the third thing is observability.
You've
right?
got number 3.
Number 3 is not having observability, not having a way to actually understand what's going on in your pipeline, not treating it like code, right? People don't version things. People will just have like a script somewhere on someone's desktop and, treat it like anything else. Have some standards. Yeah.
Gotcha. Kat, what do you think? What do you think are some
right.
common anti-patterns?
So I've got 2, and one of them is a lot like one of Austin's. The CD should stand for continuous deployment, not continuous delivery. If the whole point of this is to like reliably, consistently, and quickly get new software to the users, then having a human involved in pressing the big green deploy button is a safety blanket. Just deploy it. Just deploy it and accept the fact that whether a human is pressing that big green button or not, you are going to deploy a bad update eventually. It's going to happen. What matters is how quickly you can respond to that, and just automating the deployment makes it easier for you to respond more quickly. This is a hill I'm absolutely willing to die on and or fight on Twitter about. So if you disagree with me, please bring it. But
her Twitter handle's right there if you're looking to get into an argument with somebody.
Oh yeah, I'm on PTO. I have plenty of time to fight about this on Twitter.
And I appreciate you giving us some of your time tonight. I really do.
Welcome.
Jess, did you have anything else you wanted to add, or did you think it's got covered?
I feel like Kat and Austin and Pierre and everyone has kind of covered it. I think for me, like, while we all can have opinions about the way to do things, and certainly, I mean, I talk about best practices, there's certain scenarios where something that we would define as an anti-pattern might be something that they still need to do, as Austin touched base on the approvals. Like if you are in an environment where that's required for your corporation, then it's hard to sit there and say that what they're doing is the opposite of what they should be doing, because that's what they have to do. So I think that's my one comment to that. But I think everyone raised some really great points. And the key takeaway I took from all that was just get comfortable with not having so much control all the time. Like that's why you're implementing this. And I think that's one of the easiest anti-patterns is people go and invest so much time into setting this up that they still want to have control of everything. They want to click the button. They want to click the approvals. They want to do all the checks and the unit tests, and they want to be in control of that. And that's not
want to feel safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is human nature, but that's not why you set this up.
You need to trust the tool and like trust that you trust the tool, trust the concept of CI/CD, and just like
the code, version control your pipeline as code.
Yeah, and get over yourself and stop micromanaging the thing that was literally designed to make your job easier. Stop micromanaging it. Just let it do its thing, especially if you paid for it. You paid money for this thing and you're still sitting there micromanaging it, pushing buttons. Come on.
Yeah, like psychological safety in your deploy process is important. You don't want to overthink it. You don't want to take automation and turn it into something manual. It's kind of the ultimate anti-pattern is to involve yourself in the process of automating something. And so we're got about 10 minutes left. And so that I'm going to bring up something I know, Kat, you like to talk about, security. We haven't touched on anything about security. And so, Jess liked best practices and said that's her strength. So we're going to talk about some best practices, Kat. What are some security best practices to follow in your pipeline?
So I think that it's easy to fall into a trap of introducing like vulnerability detection into your pipeline and then just trusting that that's enough. Having vulnerability detection built into your pipeline is important, because if it detects like a known problem, a published CVE in one of your dependencies, it can fail to build, immediately bounce it back to the developer, and you update the dependency that is affected by the CVE if there is a fixed version. And that's great, and it's a really important thing to do. But I think people or orgs that don't have necessarily like a dedicated security team who understands this kind of stuff kind of sometimes tend to build in vulnerability detection and then assume that like that's enough. And it's not enough. You do still need like a dedicated security team, but having vulnerability detection built into your pipeline does make things a little bit safer, and it certainly makes it much faster when something does go wrong to fix it. Because really, it'll just, if your CI is running with every single commit, then it's just immediately going to get bounced back to the developer if it finds a problem, which is pretty rad. Because again, I'm really lazy, and I would rather just fix it there.
Sure. Jessica, what do you think are some security best practices that you want to make sure people are following in their pipeline?
I think the first part is understanding that security is everyone's job. Anytime I talk to customers or talk to an audience, you'll always see the ops people, and even to a certain extent, the developers, take a deep sigh of relief when I have a slide about security up, because the first thought is, it's not my problem. That's a security team. Security team's going to handle that. No, security is everyone's problem. From an infrastructure or ops perspective, it's your job to secure the infrastructure that you have set up and ensure that you have policies in place to make sure that those resources are secure. From a developer, it's your job to be testing your code, and you can run vulnerability detection tools even locally before you check it in. For whoever is managing the source control repo, you can make sure that you have tools enabled to detect connection strings before they ever get detected in, or any kind of secret information before they get checked in. You really, I think one of the best practices is to take ownership of security from, again, an everyone is responsible perspective. Further than that, being that I deal with containers a lot of people assume that just because they put their code in a container that now it's secure.
That drives me crazy. It drives me up the wall.
I had somebody email me because they were surprised. They're like, wait, malicious code can run in a container and gain access to the host? I'm like, absolutely. Yeah. Like those are the stories.
And that's not all.
And that's not all.
It's still computers. It's still computers.
Yep. And all a container is it's an application running on somebody else's computer, right? Even if it's in the cloud. So I think the biggest thing is being very intentional with your code, with your application, with how it's being delivered, wherever you fit in that process. From the container perspective, make sure that your container isn't running as root. Make sure that you are using some sort of registry scanning tool that's going to scan your containers both on push and even from a local perspective, but then also once they're in that registry as well. Constantly scanning your binaries. Make sure that you're getting updates on if there's a vulnerability in that binary. I can go on and on about security, but I will let someone else talk.
Absolutely. Well, we've got a little less than 6 minutes, and so there's a question from the audience, and Pierre, I'm going to shoot it to you here, okay. And then I'll ask Austin for you to kind of take a look at this one as well. Are there advantages of having one pipeline to rule all, where passing variables to determine what stack to deploy and build? So I suppose not building several different pipelines, is there a real advantage to doing one big pipeline?
So I'm going to use the usual, it depends, okay? There are times, let's say you're doing infrastructure as code and the environment doesn't change often. In that case, you can have just one pipeline, for everything else. But as some of my colleagues talks about different environment, you have test environments, then you have dev, then you have production, you can have different pipeline designs to do the same thing. Or if you want, using YAML, you can integrate all of those into it so that when a certain pipeline runs, they don't call all of the others. So the short answer, it really is, it depends. Now, if you tell me exactly what you really want to do, we can discuss that, and I can find you the best recommendation about what you're gonna do. Very quickly, before I want to jump over what Jessica and Kat talks about security. So GitHub is really a great tool when it comes to code security, dependable, and vulnerability checks, and everything else and so forth.
I really like that it scans my my repos for keys. That's such an important thing. Austin, I will ask you to hit this question because we've got just about 4 minutes left. What do you think about a one pipeline to rule them all?
I think it depends so much on both where you're at, but also where you've been and where you're going, right? I think the best thing that most people can do, if you were greenfielding this entire thing and you're saying like, oh, I have the enough rope to go and cast it way out into the deep waters, I'm going to redo everything perfectly, then yeah, I would say, one pipeline and then change based on variables or other, on state that is passed into the build. But most people don't have that luxury. What I would say is useful for most people and something that's much more accomplishable is encourage component reuse of your pipeline. So if you have, like I said, treat it like code. Take things out that are shared functionality, maintain them like they're shared functionality, and try to reuse those. This helps not only if you're in sort of a, let's say you're going through like a microservices conversion, right? Then as people add new microservices, rather than having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time on building out their pipeline for that new service, they have a toolkit. They've got like, oh, okay, this is a Go microservice that's running on this image. I can just go pick and throw some stuff together, and it's good. It works, and I have confidence that it's being, scanned properly and cataloged properly, and da 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 da. So I don't know if that really helps, but.
It seemed to. Budaboy here said, thank you. To build out Corner Maven Yarn deploy to AKS. I'm not really sure what we're talking about at the end there, but I know that there's a big thank you to everybody for answering that question.
Yeah.
So hey,
hit us up on Twitter if you'd like.
Sure. Yeah, everybody's Twitter handles are below, and I'm going to actually let everybody start to say goodbye. Pierre. Yes. Thank you so much for being part. If people want to follow up with you and talk to you more about Azure DevOps, where should they go?
Okay, so you can either send me an email, pierre.donegro@microsoft.com. And internally, I have a DevOps chat every Thursday, which actually bring all the experts within Microsoft to talk to managers and engineers alike about current features about DevOps, just like Jay is doing here on, and it's very enriching experience because DevOps is huge, right? So
absolutely.
We bring all of this together into one platform. In fact, Jay is one of my speakers the next coming weeks. So
Austin,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Pierre. Austin, we got about a minute or so left. I'm going to ask you to kind of give me a quick, what are we up to, where we can find you?
Yeah, so if you want to bother me online, it's not a bother, at Austin L. Parker. It's right down there, right there. Yeah, Twitter. And if you would like to hear more about DevOps from no one on this panel, but from Microsoft's own Chloe Condon, please go to desertedislanddevops.com and register for a live stream that'll be happening on the 30th. That's next Friday, and it's going to be it's free, it's on Twitch. It was a ton of fun last year, and I hope everyone watching this comes and sees this one. And a lot of great talks on DevOps and other interesting topics.
Very cool. Jess, where can you find more information about you and all the amazing stuff you do?
You can find me on Twitter at JLDean, or you can check out my blog, jessicadean.com, and pretty much just throw up a smoke signal online and I'll see it.
And Kat, I'll ask you to close us out, and then everybody, I'd like us to give a big wave. Kat, where you're Dixie3 Flatline on Twitter, but where else can we get info on you?
In theory, you can email me as well. My email address is kat.cosgrove@gmail.com. I do own a domain, but I just can't stop using my stupid Gmail account. You can email me in theory. I wouldn't super recommend it. I think I have like 13,000 unread emails in my inbox right now. So you are genuinely better off just messaging me on Twitter. So just tweet at me if you've got questions about like DevOps tooling or Kubernetes or my extremely cute cat or whatever.
It is an extremely cute cat.
Oh gosh, she's precious. You can reach out to me there. I post lots of pictures of the cat on Twitter. So.
Well, everybody loves cat pictures. It's why the internet was invented. And the other thing I think the internet was invented for is to give everybody a big virtual goodbye. So why don't we go ahead and start doing that? Everyone, thank you so much for watching. We will catch you the next time we do one of these. Thanks to our panel. You were all wonderful. Thanks to our viewers. We'll see you next time.